Hey guys, my name is Morgan Williams, and today I will be talking about the Environmental and Social Impact Assessment of SG Sustainable Oils Cameroon performed by H&B Consulting. To begin, a quick overview of the palm oil industry. Palm oil is the main source of all vegetable oils. Between the years of 2003 and 2008, there was a massive increase of palm oil consumption at about 48%. And in the year 2008, over 182,000 million tons were consumed. And in 2010, there was a palm oil deficit of 100,000 million tons in Cameroon. It is important to note that the palm oil industry is also highly controversial. Large plantations have led to a number of human rights violations, such as land grabs, and are often attributed to slave-like working conditions. The palm oil industry also leads to huge levels of deforestation and habitat destruction for many species, such as orangutans. So for a brief introduction to the project itself, SG Sustainable Oils Cameroon is a palm oil plantation located in Cameroon. The main goals of SG Sustainable Oils Cameroon is to produce three palm oil products, being crude palm oil, palm kernel oil, and biodiesel. SG Sustainable Oil Cameroons also has goals to reduce poverty, prevent the spread of illness, improve health, and provide education within Cameroon. This image to the right is also a list of some more of their missions. I'll not read them all, but if you would like to pause and read them now, you can. SG Sustainable Oils Cameroon is a huge project budgeted at $2 billion. The budget for this project comes from Heracles Farms, which is a company within the United States. Located on 80,506 hectares in Mandemba, Toko, and Ngudi in the Nadian and Kupe Managouba divisions in southwest Cameroon. On the map to the right, you can see the project area highlighted in gray. I'll be sure to also post a map of the entire country of Cameroon so you can see where this is located within the country itself. Of the 80,506 hectares, 70,000 will be the actual plantation, while the remaining 10,506 will be factories and other buildings. It is important to note that the project site bumps up against the edge of the Karup Natural Park. This location was chosen for a few reasons. The first was an adequate amount of land that had already been mostly deforested for agricultural use, a favorable climate that includes heavy rainfall that would reduce the need for watering, and an already established agricultural sector that could supply workers. Because of the existing agricultural sector, there was also existing infrastructure such as roads. The people involved in performing the ESIA are the H&B Consulting USA LLC, which is a subsidiary of an American company, H&B Consulting. To the left is a list of the members of H&B Consulting that did this assessment. When looking through the list, they all appear to be qualified. They seem to be a good mix of economists, environmental scientists, botanists, and zoologists. I actually found the project manager, Haman Bako Salamatu, on LinkedIn and found that he is a master's in environmental microbiology from the State University of New York College at Buffalo. Data collection for this assessment occurred in three main ways: a socioeconomic needs assessment, a flora survey, and a fauna survey. The socioeconomic needs assessment consisted of public hearings, open houses, focus groups, village and household questionnaires and surveys, and they were sent to 32 villages. There are a total of 38 villages in the project area, but 2 were unresponsive and 4 were confirmed to be ghost villages. The flora survey took samples of soil in the project area and documented all flora in the area to determine their threat status. The flora survey was conducted similarly, except studying fauna instead of flora. The socioeconomic needs assessment found the following positive impacts: up to 9,000 jobs created by the project, rural development, useful job training and education, housing creation, access to electricity and water, healthcare, commercial opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises, tax revenue for the government, and scholarships for local universities. However, the socioeconomic needs assessment also found the following negative impacts: land loss due to local farmers, destruction of community-based economy, exposure to health risks such as HIV, AIDS, and malaria, food insecurity, since many of the small farmers whose lands are being taken grow food goods, destruction of indigenous culture and values, and as previously mentioned, large palm oil plantations often have unfavorable work environments which have a lower quality of life. That includes low wages for laborers and workers, and increased air and water pollution. The Flora Survey found that in the project area, there are 8 IUCN red-listed species, 6 vulnerable species, 1 endangered species, and 1 near-threatened species. The Fauna Survey found that since the area is already being used for agricultural uses, it would have no further effects on local species. However, they do note that there could be some negative effects to elephants in the area. The mitigation strategies posed by the authors fell under 5 main categories. The first category being a commitment to transparency, then compliance with all applicable laws and regulations, a commitment to long-term economic and financial viability, the use of appropriate best practices of growers and millers, and lastly, an environmental responsibility in conservation of natural resources. The mitigation recommendations posed are to take a responsible consideration of employees and communities affected by the project, a commitment to continuous improvement in key areas of activity to avoid potential land use conflicts with local communities. They need to have a zero burn policy when clearing nursery land, control the usage of chemicals such as fertilizers and pesticides to reduce the runoff of pollution in the likely event of high levels of rain, and all containers used for the storage of oil, grease, or other contaminants must be collected and disposed of properly. Traffic signals and speed limits must be imposed on roads to the nursery, and all workers should be supplied personal protective apparel. Primary forests should not be cut down, and they should build a 3-kilometer buffer zone between the project area and the national park. Lastly, they must follow the WWF better management practices in regards to the potentially impacted elephants. While these are great mitigation recommendations, I feel like they are too heavily focused on the environmental impacts rather than the social impacts. Suggested environmental monitoring are focused on reducing pollution. The first monitoring recommendation is to regularly monitor air quality through measuring levels of particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxides. They also suggest monitoring the pollution levels of ground and surface waters and ensuring all drainage systems work properly. They should also be regularly soil testing. To the right is a table found on page 308 of the report. While the monitoring column is blank, it does show the importance they place on certain impacts. Suggested social monitoring are to evaluate the effectiveness of recruitment efforts to ensure job preference is given to local villagers. They also recommend evaluating the ongoing community perception of the project while developing and operating the plantation. They also suggest monitoring the impacts of workers who move to the area, and they suggest monitoring community concern to ensure that conflicts do not develop. They place an importance on resolving all grievances as quickly as possible to ensure they do not develop into conflict. Lastly, they have several monitoring strategies to monitor public health. When comparing the assessment to the principles of the International SIA, the authors excelled in all things related to intervention, including predicting possible interventions and leaving them open for modifications, and having alternatives. The authors also brought up several times if during the construction the project, they came across any cultural or religious sites, they should be left alone at all costs. The authors also placed a heavy importance on following all laws, including those that prohibit violence. There were points, however, that they were not properly addressed. One of these major points was all things related to equity. While they did touch on the possible job creation of the project, they never addressed how these jobs might negatively affect community members. One of the most important principles I feel was not properly addressed is number 4. I feel as if the SIA was written in the very beginning of the development process because of necessity, and I feel as if it was not taken into consideration during all following stages. I also feel as if there was a lack of importance on principle number 5. The report went far more in depth on the environmental side of the assessment rather than the social side. Because of this, I feel as if there was not sufficient focus on socially sustainable development. This is similar to the weakness I found in regards to principle number 9. The authors went far more in depth into the possible environmental impacts of the plantation, while the environmental impacts, which are just as important, and it felt as if the social impacts were somewhat neglected. As previously stated, I do not feel as if this assessment meets the international SIA guidelines. While the report went in depth into many of the possible environmental impacts posed by the project, it did not delve very deep into the social impacts. Overall, I would give this assessment a C. Not great, but not terrible. The report gave an incredibly detailed look into the inner workings of the plantation itself, but a very large section of this report was diagrams and descriptions of equipment that could be in the plantation. The flora and fauna studies were also well done and did a good job examining potential animal and plant species that could be affected, and they also did a good job examining the current state of the project site. I also feel as if these studies lead to an inclusive list of monitoring recommendations. However, as mentioned several times, the entire assessment itself focused more on all things environmental and was lacking on the social side. The authors also left out a very important aspect. There was no comparative study done. I found this interesting because the authors briefly brought up two plantations, Saco Palm and Pommel, that the SGSOC could have been compared to. So, while this report did some things very well, many things were also lacking.